welcome to this week's End of Days Update, coming to you from Mattoon, Illinois. Had such a great time at New Mercy Church. Folks are so hungry, into the coming of the Lord. It's amazing to see how close we are to Jesus coming back, and the churches seem to be catching it. So we're coming to you every week to look at the different things that point to the coming of the Lord, and specifically the events that happened right after the rapture of the church, which would be the Ezekiel 38 war, because the rapture is signless, but the second coming has tons of signs. So if we can look at what happens there, we can say, man, we're really getting close to the rapture of the church. There are so many signs of the second coming and so many things as a setup for what happens just after we leave. So remember, Jesus rebuked the crowd. He said, hey, you can tell what the weather's going to be, but you don't know your hour of your visitation. So he wanted them to know. So what we're getting into end time events for is so we'll hustle. It's not an escape theology. It's when you see the finish line, you run faster. I had a guy tell me one time, man, if you teach on the coming of the Lord, just get everybody's hopes up. Duh, that's exactly right. It's the hope that purifies us even as we're pure. So we get into these things to make us accelerate as you come down to the last minute of a football game. You got the 2-minute warning. Everything's crucial, so the church has to get that mentality. So let's pick up with what's happened around Israel. Man, you had a lot of stuff happen around Israel this last week. First of all, of course, you had the Palestinians with Hamas in Gaza starting again doing incendiary balloons. So fires were started in southern Israel. And Israel obviously retaliated. This time they retaliated with artillery fire where those places were. It's kind of ridiculous that they keep doing that. But then you had some incendiary balloons on the north from Lebanon. And even this last week you had some fire come in from Lebanon. Israel retaliated. And then there were some flares that went off last night simultaneously where Gaza is and is Lebanon as well. So the IDF is getting ready for some more stuff. So interesting things there. Let's move to Iran after we come back to Israel here in a minute, but man, Iran's got some really bizarre things happening. You got up to almost 100,000 people protesting in Tehran because they have no water and they have no power. So people are coming against the government of Iran like, hey, you're so bent on getting missiles to annihilate Israel, but we can't live here. So it's interesting to see that play out in the streets. We'll see what happens with that. But you also got Iran doing some other stuff. It came out, it was revealed that they were ready to do a massive cyber attack of Western Europe and of the United States. That was caught just in the last couple of days. Also, some Mossad agents were caught in Iran, literally getting ready to do some things inside Iran. And what we get into in a few minutes will make that make more sense, because Israel had to hit some more airstrikes in Syria again. It's pretty amazing that Israel's having to do that. They had to take out another cache of weapons in one location and then in another location. But the amazing thing about that's happened a lot lately because Iran is so bent on getting those missiles down into Hezbollah. But Iran's doing several things along with that. I mean, it's kind of intriguing to see Israel have to take out another convoy literally 2 weeks in a row. The amazing thing is Putin met with our President Biden, and after that, Putin made the decision technically to close down the air in Syria. So what happened this last time, there were airstrikes in Syria. Actually, there were missile strikes from Israel into Syria, which were Iranian locations. You had Russian defense mechanisms go up and try to shoot down those missiles. So right now, Russia's coming in and telling Israel, you can't fire on those Iranian brigades again, but Israel's going to have to do something. So Iran's doing more stuff than normal. They even opened up a new oil port in the Gulf of Oman to kind of literally get around the Straits of Hormuz. They're bypassing the Strait of Hormuz so they don't get caught with sanctions again. So that's another thing to help them get their oil out. So it's interesting to see one thing after another with Iran. There's just different things happening every week that shows their true colors. Well, with that, you had Turkey this last week. Go back into Cyprus, enter into that hotel that they'd taken over years ago. So they're literally flexing their muscles in Cyprus. Turkey's flexing their muscles in Libya, literally training Palestinian officers in Libya to be in Gaza to attack Israel. Along with that, you've got Turkish soldiers on the northern part of Syria fighting the Kurds and in Iraq. So Turkey's completely surrounding Israel right now, and then Russia's doing the things that they basically are showing their cards, along with China doing what all China's doing. I mean, it's crazy to hear the different things that are coming out of China. Last week, China said they were going to nuke anyone that came against them for going into Taiwan. Taiwan. So you've got floods, you've got heat, you've got all the natural things. You had another asteroid fly by this last Sunday, which was a huge one that came by really close. I mean, I think this one was the size of one of the Egyptian pyramids, they said. So that's ticking up every week. The weather being crazy, but really watching what's happening with Iran and watching what's happening with Syria and with Russia, those are the telltale things that show us there's a great change coming. That change is Jesus is about to come back. And Iran keeps doing all these things that are just basically provocative because they believe with their doctrine, if they try to attack Israel, it'll bring their Messiah in. But then you had Jordan come out and say, hey, our state, Jordan, is not going to be a Palestinian state. So there's a lot going on with that because Jordan was freaking out about the Temple Mount. And you had, this was really cool about the Temple Mount, you had a lady getting the correct insects to have the red dye that they need for the third temple. So pretty cool to see one thing after another set up for the temple because that's going to get built right after we leave. So man, you're seeing the setup for it right now. So all these things are coming to pass right in front of our eyes because the King's about to come back. So we always go to the signs every week. What is it? Jesus said, the generation that sees Israel made a nation and Jerusalem won back, he said that generation won't pass away till all is fulfilled. So that's happened in our lifetime. I hear people say, well, I don't believe that. It don't matter. I hear people say, I'm not comfortable with that. It doesn't matter. You're it. We're it. But then after that, you've got the Hebrew language restored. You got the Ethiopian Jews brought back. You've got the fertility of the land of Israel. You've got the revival of the Roman Empire. You've got the fertility of the land. You've got the Temple Mount Institute literally ready to have sacrifices. Man, everything ready. Then you had the dye that they need for the temple. So you have 172 different species of predatory birds. You got foxes show up on the Temple Mount. You had fish show up in the Dead Sea. You had the ritual baths around the temple fill up with water. So all these things are what the Bible said you'd see just before the coming of the Lord. One that's really radical is you had Russia rebuild the arch in Palmyra for Baal worship. And the Talmud says that's one of the last things you'll see before the Messiah comes. So you got tons of stuff like that happening every single week that are pointing to Jesus about to come back to the planet. How exciting. We're about to see the King face to face. So you got signals after that. You had the blood red moons on Passover and Tabernacles. Pretty radical. 4 in a row. NASA calls it a tetrad. When's the last time you had 4 in a row on Passover and Tabernacles? 1967 when Jerusalem was won back. 1948 when Israel was made a nation. 1492 at the Edict of Expulsion when the Jews were kicked out of Spain. So you had that. Then you had the Bethlehem Star this last year. At the birth of Jesus, you had Jupiter, Regulus, and Venus come together. That's so wild to have all that come together. And here NBC Nightly News said this last year we had a celestial event, Bethlehem Star. Wow. You have signs, you have signals, and then you had Ben and Jerry's ice cream from America literally boycott the West Bank area of Israel. So why is that a big deal? That's a huge deal because all that did was Palestinians lose jobs that are there in the West Bank. There's a ton getting ready to happen with Judea and Samaria. So along with all the signs and all the signals that we have about the coming of the Lord, there's specific things about the borders from the 6-day war. And you've got companies from America doing BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction. Ben and Jerry saying we're not going to serve anything in the West Bank. How crazy is that? So those Palestinians lose their jobs. So you watch what's going to happen getting close to the Temple Mount and getting close with Judea and Samaria. We're about to see Jesus. So we got signs, we got signals. So what do? Help our local church, help our local pastor, be engaged. Let's have all hands on deck doing what we can do because we're about to see Jesus. Wow. What will you say to him? Eyes as a flame of fire, feet like undefined brass, voice of many waters. We're about to see the King, Jesus, glorified, magnified right in front of our eyes. Well, let's come back next week. We'll see what's happened. Lots going to happen probably with Russia protecting the airspace in Syria, literally letting Iran bring missiles down in close to Israel. Israel's going to have to do something, so probably something ballistic is going to happen here in the next little bit. I didn't even get into Russia's hyperspace missiles, and Israel's got a new laser system to take that out. There's so much stuff going on because Jesus is getting ready to come back. Have a blessed, awesome week. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Thanks for joining us today at the End of Days Update. If you'd like to be notified every time there's a new post, just go to the edu at josephmorris.com and subscribe to receive email alerts. If these posts and updates have been a blessing to you, please consider making a one-time donation to help get the message out or even becoming a monthly partner with Joseph Morris Ministries. Thanks again for tuning in to the EDU, and we'll see you next week.